Hi, welcome everyone. We are going to finish chapter 7, part 3. So for part 3, our course targets is to introduce you the concept of income and intertemporal substitution effect. Then we are going to talk about consumption smoothing and finish the chapter with consumption and investment relationship. Now we are moving to talk about income and intertemporal substitution effects. We consider the scenario that the interest rate in the economy is increasing. First, we start from intertemporal consumption decision. We know that intertemporal consumption decision is weighing consumption today on the left-hand side versus investment today to get consumption tomorrow on the right-hand side. For one basket that you sacrifice today, you are going to get R divided by P plus 1 minus delta units of basket tomorrow for consumption. We also know that the return tomorrow actually will be equal to the 1 plus interest rate. So if the interest rate is increasing over time, then it means that tomorrow with high interest rate we are going to get more baskets than before. Therefore, consuming today will not look so attractive compared to investment today in order to get more consumption tomorrow, because now 1 unit of investment today will get you more consumption than before. Therefore, with this interest rate increase, you're supposed to decrease your consumption today so that you are able to invest more and to increase your consumption tomorrow. Therefore, we know that high interest rate today is going to give you an intertemporal substitution effect on consumption. It will make today's consumption decrease so that you are able to increase your investment today, which leads to a higher consumption tomorrow. Now we move on to talk about income, or called wealth effect. Remember that for intertemporal budget constraints, your bucket has 2 piles of cash from today and from tomorrow. Suppose that you are a saver. It means that you move some piles of cash from today to tomorrow. However, any cash you move to tomorrow, it will be inflated by 1 plus I. Therefore, when interest rate increase, this inflating factor will make your money even bigger. Therefore, you will feel wealthier. This kind of feeling, as a saver, you feel wealthier, it will cause an income effect, or we call wealth effect, which would make your consumption today and tomorrow to increase. However, if you are a borrower, then you are moving some pile of cash from tomorrow to today. And remember that any money from the future you move to today, it will be deflated by divided it by 1 plus I, which we call the discounting. Therefore, when interest rate is higher, then the discounting factor will be bigger, which will make your money even smaller. Therefore, you will feel poorer. So when interest rate increase, if you are a borrower, you will feel poorer. It will create an income and wealth effect that makes you want to decrease your consumption both today and tomorrow. Now we talk about consumption smoothing. Consumption smoothing is a human behavior that most consumers prefer they have a very stable consumption over their lifetime. Therefore, when they face income change, they will still try to achieve that. We use this graph as an example. In this case, this black man live for 3 periods, 1, 2, and 3. Apparently, he would be very rich in period 2, but kind of poor in period 1 and 3. So his life income stream would like a hump shape, like a mountain. So if he really wanted to do consumption smoothing, we assume that interest rate is 0%, therefore he can move money back and forth without deflating or inflating. So to smooth consumption, what he can do is that since he's poor in period 1, he can try to borrow from period 2. And when he is in period 2, he can try to save some money for period 3. In this kind of arrangement, he will be able to achieve smooth consumption for whole 3 periods. He will be able to consume 3 piles of cash for each period. Therefore, his consumption pattern will be very flat, very smooth. This is called consumption smoothing. We use another example. For this blue guy, he is rich in period 1 and 3 and kind of poor in period 2. So his income stream for his lifetime would like this valley shape. And for consumption smoothing, what he can do is that when he is rich in day 1, he can save. And when he goes to day 2, he can borrow from day 3. In this case, he can also achieve the same amount of smooth consumption level as the black person. Then his consumption pattern would be also a flat line like the black one. And it also has 3 piles of cash for each period to spend. So if we put black and blue person together, what we observe is that in day 1, suppose day 1 is today, then for today we observe that these 2 persons have different income level, but somehow they have the same consumption level. How can that happen? That is because they must have the same ability to have the same smooth consumption level. This ability, this smooth consumption level that they can achieve, we call it the permanent income level that they have. Therefore, if 2 households have the same permanent income level, they will be able to achieve the same smooth consumption pattern. Now we consider some kind of income shock and see how household will adjust their consumption if they prefer consumption smoothing. First, we consider the scenario. Suppose there's some kind of good news that government is going to give the household 1 pile of extra cash for every period. So this 1 pile of cash drop is a permanent income change for the household. It will last for the entire life. Then how would the household do for his consumption? If the household prefer consumption smoothing, then what he can do is that first we know that this kind of permanent income change will shift the income pattern upward to this new green line. And then the household can reshuffle its cash piles. For example, he can move 1 pile of cash from day 2 to day 1, and then move 2 piles of cash from day 2 to day 3. In this case, the household will be able to achieve a higher consumption level of 4 piles of cash for each period. And as you can see that the consumption level that the household can achieve would be shifted upward exactly by 1 pile of cash that he is going to get from the government for each period. So what we have so far is that if we only look at day 1, then day 1, remember this household used to have only 2 piles of cash. Now what we will observe that the government give him extra piles of cash. So the pile of cash that increased is 1 unit. In response to this income change, 1 unit income change, the household would change its consumption from 3 piles of consumption to 4 piles of consumption. And the increase of consumption will be exactly equal to the 1 pile of cash that government give him permanently. So what we have so far is that we can see in day 1, this household become richer by 1 unit of income. In response to that 1 unit of income increase, the household increases consumption exactly by 1 unit. In this case, we will observe that the marginal propensity to consume of income, which is defined as the change of consumption over the change of income, which is delta C over delta I, this ratio is going to be 1. But we have to remember the reason that consumption increases as much as income, that is because the household is facing a permanent income change. So now we move on to the next example. What happens if this income change is temporary? Suppose that the government only give the household 1 pile of cash in day 1, but there's no more cash draw for day 2 and 3. So if the household is doing consumption smoothing, what can he do? Very easily, he can break the cash into 1/3 and then move this 1/3 cash to today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and then he reshuffle the cash pile again. As you can see that this new arrangement to achieve consumption smoothing would be able to let the household to consume 3 1/3 piles of cash for each period. Consumption increase and still perfectly smooth, but it does not increase as much as before. It's only increased by 1/3 unit. So if we look at a day 1 for this kind of a change, we would observe that on day 1, income changed from 2 piles of cash to 3 piles of cash, which is the same observation as our previous example. The change in income we observed today is still 1 unit. However, the change in consumption will be increasing from 3 piles of cash to only 3 1/3 piles of cash. Therefore, the change in consumption is only 1/3. And you can see that in this example, the change in consumption is not as strong as the changes of income. Therefore, the propensity to consume is only 1/3, which is less than 1 as before. This is because that the household is facing a temporary income change. Therefore, if household has a preference for consumption smoothing, he would try to smooth out this temporary income change for future usage. That's why the consumption today will not increase as much as income increased today. So what we have so far is that sometimes we can observe a household whose income pattern goes up and down, but consumption is very flat. So observation 1 is a household's income can be very volatile, but its consumption level is relatively smooth. The second observation is that sometimes we observe 2 different households. They seem to have 2 different income levels today, but they could have the same consumption level today. So that's observation 2. 2 households with different incomes can have the same consumption level under consumption smoothing. And also, we will have observation 3. Sometimes we observe in the data, household income distribution is very dispersed. Like here, one household has 2 piles, the other one has 4 piles. However, household consumption distribution is very equal. So in this case, that 2 households actually they have a different income level today, but they seem to have the same consumption level today. The fourth observation is that when there is a permanent income change, then today's consumption will increase almost as much as today's income change. This is only true when the income change is a permanent phenomenon. However, if the income change is only for today, not for the day 2 and day 3, then what we will see is that today's consumption change will not be as much as the income change today. This is because the income change today is temporary. So we reach our observation 4. The more permanent an income change is, the closer the marginal propensity to consume of income is to 1. Now we move on to talk about the relationship between consumption and investment. To understand the relationship between consumption and investment, we have to go back to look at household budget constraint. So on the slide, we see a typical budget constraint for a household, but there are so many different households. So we use superscript J to represent different kinds of household in the economy. So we can have household 1, household 2, all the way to household J and continue. And the only thing different in their notation is their superscript. We use the number 1, 2 to J and all the way through. Then we can sum all these households together into one single representative household. When we sum all of them together, we would have the following aggregate household budget constraint for this jumbo household. And we usually like to use the notation summation to denote the aggregate. That's what we see on the bottom of the slide. So now we focus on this aggregated household budget constraint. In this constraint, we first look at the income part from our input for production, which is L and K. So this is the total income that come from labor or capital rental. So we assume that the production value that go to labor or capital owner is equal to GDP. This actually is not a bad assumption because in the reality, they are either labor or capitalist. So GDP represents the production value that the economy can generate. The production value has to be distributed either to labor or to capitalists. That's why the sum of these two income sources would be equal to GDP. This won't be a bad assumption. And then we move on to the term of the summation of bound investment. We assume facing a closed economy. So there's no borrowing lending from foreign country. If this is the assumption, which means that in this world, in this economy, if somebody who lend people money in this period, which means its delta Bj is larger than 0, it must be somebody who borrow money, which means its delta Bj is less than 0. So because somebody borrow means somebody must be lending, therefore the sum of the total bond investment must be equal to 0 in an enclosed economy. Following the same reason, the balance holding of bonds, for some household it must be larger than 0, while some household its balance bond holding must be less than 0. And its aggregate must be equal to 0 all the time in an enclosed economy. So we can replace the red color part of the input income sources to be GDP, and the part regarding bonds could be replaced with 0. So we end up with the following budget constraint representation. Now we try to use capital K to denote the summation of all households Kj, and capital C to represent the summation of all household consumptions, and then the delta capital K to represent the summation of each household's capital investment, delta Kj. Then we end up with the equality saying that GDP minus the depreciation part of capital replacement investment should be equal to the consumption of the economy plus the net investment of the economy. And if we further divide both sides by price level P, then we would end up with the equality saying that real GDP minus delta K will be equal to consumption plus delta K. Here, the term real GDP minus delta K is the part of output that once we deduct the part that's being used for replacement purpose, then it will be the remaining domestic product that can be used for consumption and investment to build up capital. So we call it real net domestic product. And on the right hand side means that it can be used for either consumption or for net investment to build up capital for the next period. So if we draw on the graph with vertical axis to be net investment, horizontal axis to be consumption, then if two countries A and B have the same real net domestic product, then they will be on the same line, and the country that has higher private consumption would mean it would have a lower net investment, like country B. So there is a negative trade-off between consumption and net investment if two countries have the same real net domestic product.